You ever ask yourself, why are public services getting worse and worse, but at the same time getting more expensive every single year? Well, it turns out you're not crazy. Britain's public services are in shambles. And there's one word that underpins all of this: privatisation. Privatisation of public services, utilities and infrastructure was sold as the magic solution. We were told competition would drive efficiency, cost reduction and service improvement. Fast forward 4 decades and the opposite has happened. Bills are higher, services are worse, and our core infrastructure is crumbling. Water companies pump raw sewage into our rivers and seas, trains are more expensive than anywhere else in Europe, and energy bills have skyrocketed, more than doubling in just a few years. So today, the UK is one of the most privatised economies in the whole of Europe. And this might look great if you look at GDP figures or other national statistics, but this doesn't reflect how disastrous privatisation has been for the everyday person. For the average person, real wages have stagnated since 2008. Meanwhile, the essential services that they rely on have continued to take more and more money from their pockets and handed it over to private shareholders, many of whom are overseas. So how did we get here? What was the original idea behind privatisation and why has it failed? And most importantly, can we take these services back into public hands? To understand why Britain is so privatised, we have to understand the economic and political ideas that were driving the 1980s. From 1945 into the late 1960s, the UK had steady growth and rising living standards. It succeeded in large-scale infrastructure projects, such as establishing the NHS, council housing, and the welfare state, and also saw a huge expansion on school education. For decades, unemployment rarely rose above 3%. This period is sometimes known as the golden age of capitalism. However, the 1970s in Britain were a decade of crisis. Inflation was running out of control, at one point peaking above 20% in 1975, and the country was hit by waves of public sector strikes, often known as the Winter of Discontent, which saw in 1978 to 79 rubbish piling up on the streets, unburied bodies in morgues and power cuts, all feeding a sense that the government had lost control. So for free market loving capitalists, they saw this as a great opportunity to blame the post-war consensus for all the issues society was experiencing. State-owned industries were blamed for being inefficient and uncompetitive. So in the midst of all this turmoil, the public elected the Conservative Party to government in 1979, with the new Prime Minister being Margaret Thatcher. Thatcher had a new economic vision for Britain, one that was shaped by popular thinkers at the time known as Friedrich Hayek and Milton Friedman. Friedrich and Milton's central claim was that government intervention distorted markets, created inefficiency, and stifled innovation. The private sector, they argued, would always allocate resources better than the state. Now, many will refer to this as the birth of neoliberalism in Britain. Now, for Thatcher, this wasn't just an economic policy in response to the troubles of the 1970s. This was her political project. This was fundamentally how she saw the world. So, once the ideological groundwork was laid, the Thatcher government moved quickly to put privatisation into practice. And boy did they put it into practice. The 1980s and 90s saw the largest transfer of public assets and infrastructure into private hands in modern history. British Telecom was sold in 1984 for £3.9 billion. British Gas followed in 1986 at £5.4 billion. This was shortly followed by the sales of British Electricity, British Steel and British Airways. And not long after, we saw our water being privatised along with our rail industry. In total, more than 40 state-owned industries were sold off in just over a decade. One thing the government did do is work very hard to make these sales popular, running ad campaigns such as Tell Sid, which pitched the opportunity to buy shares in these new companies to the average person.
Jack, sorry, Mike, gotta go.
These British gas shares, it couldn't be easier to do. Oh yeah, phone his number and they send you information on how to apply. If you see Sid, tell him, won't you?
Oh, I'm glad you're here. This'll interest you. British gas shares. They come out in November.
Many people were enticed by these campaigns. Millions bought shares, wanting to own a piece of this new age of capitalism, this opportunity to own a piece of Britain. But many who did buy shares were new to investing and ended up selling their shares very quickly for a small profit. So over time, shares moved away from public hands and into the hands of big institutions and overseas pension funds. So today, more than 2/3 2/3 of our utility companies are owned by foreign investors. So the government sold off all our assets and lost control of vital infrastructure. But they got some short-term cash and promised long-term benefit to the public. Privatisation was sold to Britain on 4 big promises. 1. Efficiency. 2. Lower costs. 3. Stable competition. 4. Less taxpayer burden. Private water companies were supposed to modernise our water system. Instead, today we have sewage discharge at record levels, a combined 3.6 million hours worth in 2024 alone, and we have pipe leaks that waste around 3 billion litres of water every single day. The only thing water companies have been efficient at is paying out £85 billion worth of dividends to shareholders since 1989. The rail industry was split into dozens of different operators, and all this led to was constant disputes and inefficient timetabling of who could use the tracks at certain times. And for all that, the UK trains still have some of the worst punctuality in Europe. Yet rail fares are 20% higher in real terms compared to 1995. Meanwhile, water bills are up 40% in real terms and energy prices have skyrocketed. So did privatisation make our services more secure and reliable? The answer is no. The robust free market energy sector almost collapsed overnight in 2021. And some may say this was due to the war in Ukraine and global oil prices skyrocketing. But even so, I think that shows that private energy firms do not have the resources to respond to massive global events. During this collapse of the domestic energy sector, BP and Shell were seeing record profits. And guess who used to be a majority stakeholder of BP? Until someone decided to sell it. I'm no fan of oil companies, but we still rely on oil to provide energy security while we transition to net zero. Imagine if we still owned BP and could have used these profits to subsidize people's energy bills during this period of instability. And rail companies, they just pack up and leave when they can't make any profit. East Coast and Northern services have already had to be renationalised because their private operators failed. And Thames Water, the UK's biggest water provider, is sitting on £14 billion worth of debt and teetering on collapse. But at least these private companies are the ones taking all the risk, and there's no burden for the taxpayer. You know what I'm going to say. Rail subsidies from the taxpayer are higher now than they were under British Rail. When energy firms collapsed, who had to pick up the bill? Us. And during 2021, when energy prices were skyrocketing, the government had to step in and subsidise people's energy bills that were now unaffordable. And when these water companies eventually go bankrupt, who will be the one that has to take over their debts and fix their crumbling infrastructure? Us, the taxpayer. So for every single one of these claims about the benefits of privatisation, the opposite has actually happened. Privatisation was never about fixing services. It was about shifting our public wealth and infrastructure into private hands. So on that metric, it's been a roaring success. Just quickly, I also wanted to talk about the NHS. While the NHS was never outright privatised, during the 1990s and into the noughties, a new type of privatisation started to creep in, known as Private Finance Initiative, or PFI. The idea behind PFI was quite simple. Instead of the government putting up capital to fund new hospitals or other large-scale infrastructure projects, they could use private investors to fund them. The NHS would then pay these investors back over a number of years or decades. So in 2017, the NHS had paid back over £80 billion from PFI. This is for projects that cost £13 billion to build, so 6 times more than if the government had just paid the money themselves. Often, as part of agreements, NHS services would agree to use private-backed maintenance or cleaning services. Some NHS organisations are still locked into these contracts when much cheaper alternatives exist elsewhere. So PFI companies raked in hundreds of millions, if not billions, from the NHS, all while hospitals face staff shortages and budget squeezes, and patients are seeing massive delays in getting basic treatment. So I think it's pretty obvious that privatisation of essential services has failed, and I think it should have been seen from the off that it wouldn't work. First up, many of these industries are natural monopolies. How many of you have switched your water provider in the past few years? That's a trick question. You can't. In the UK, you don't get to choose your supplier. It's dictated by your geographic location. So these water companies have millions of guaranteed customers and zero competition. So what's their incentive to provide a better service or improve existing infrastructure? And for some free marketeers, they might point to this as the reason that it's failed and not the privatisation itself. The fact that there's no competition has meant free market dynamics have not been able to take shape. But to me, that just seems illogical. Your proposal would mean that we'd have to have multiple companies digging up the streets and adding parallel or similar pipes. That's almost the opposite of efficiency. It's the same with rail. If you need to get to London for 8 AM, there's only one train and one provider that will get you there in time. There simply isn't the track or capacity for 5 operators to run the exact same journey. And energy, we all get it through the same pipes and wires regardless of our supplier. It's all coming from the national grid. You're not getting a different type of electricity or a different type of gas depending on the logo that's on your energy bill. So a free market for these essential services is an illusion. And adding competition would just be a complete waste of resources and very inefficient. Secondly, these things are not just nice to haves, they're basic human essentials. Cutting off people's energy and water supply is just inhumane. And trains being so expensive that half the population can't use them is just ridiculous. Thirdly, privatisation changes the whole flow of money through the system. When they're in private hands, a huge slice is skimmed off the top to hand over to foreign investors and shareholders. So over time, all this money that has been taken out of the system could have been used to fix pipes, lower rail fares, or subsidise energy bills. Another example of how crony this whole idea of selling off public assets is looking at Russia in the 1990s. All these billionaire oligarchs that we see, such as Roman Abramovich or any friends of Putin, they were all made rich by being able to acquire Russia's core utilities and infrastructure. Things that were owned by the public and built by public wealth. In Britain, the version is less extreme, but it's the same model, and it's somewhere where things could end up. So the whole setup was doomed from the start. Natural monopolies can't be turned into private markets, massive ethical issues, and all round a higher economic cost. Neoliberalism has proven that its core basis is about privatising profits and socialising losses. And all of this wasn't by accident, it was by design. But the question remains, can we change it? Can we take these services back into public hands? To sum up, public ownership means accountability. It means we can run and provide services based on need and not for profit. It means the money that we put into the system stays in the system. The privatisation did not modernise Britain, it broke it. It's time for the public to say enough is enough. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this, please consider liking, commenting and subscribing.